So I'm using Drake, who has a collaboration with Apple, but I'm using Drake to talk about balance theory. So balance theory promotes the idea that we want to maintain psychological consistency by forming relationships that balance our likes and dislikes. And so I'm going to kind of go over what that means in about 10 slides. So we're going to answer that. We're going to ask ourselves this question. If Drake, seen here, likes Apple, he has a collaboration with Apple, he likes Apple. What does a fan of Drake think about Apple? According to balance theory, because we want to be consistent with our attitudes and behavior, the fan of Drake would then begin to like Apple, right? This is why Apple maybe, became a supporter of Drake, or a collaborator with Drake to begin with. They know that fans of Drake may then in turn, like Apple. So you see this consistency. Drake likes Apple. You're a fan of Drake. You like Apple. But let's ask ourselves this. Let's say you don't like Drake, right? So Drake, oh, let's start here. Drake doesn't like Apple. You don't like Drake. So how do you feel about Apple? Hmm. Well, according to balance theory, if Drake doesn't like Apple and you don't like Drake, you will like Apple. Again, some level of cognitive consistency. So the reason I don't like this balance theory, I haven't really said I don't like other theories, but balance theory is that I think relationships tend to be more complex than that. However, let's be fair. If you like Drake and Drake likes Apple, there's a very good chance that you might actually like Apple, right? Because this is how these collaborations work. This is why companies hire celebrities, sports figures, these kind of people, models, because they know that having them on board will positively impact some consumers and lead them to like the product. But that's not really true of all consumers. There are people who I like and I admire, and they like products that I would never buy. And I won't necessarily develop a favorable attitude towards those products, right? But that's not true of everything, right? So if I'm sitting here, I'll give you an example. Um, every year Barack Obama releases a list of his favorite movies, his favorite shows, songs. I'm sorry, his favorite um, songs, so on and so forth. And this year, I decided that I was going to read two books that he likes. I'm going to watch two shows that he likes, so on and so forth, because he's someone I admire. At the same time, there are other people I've admired who recommended things, and I'm just like, I don't know. Again, it depends on the person. But in general, this is how balance theory works. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive, I guess, into balance theory. So if you really want to make sure you're cognitively consistent and you understand kind of what this means, step one is always to start with the celebrity's like or dislike of the brand. So how does Drake feel about Apple? In this slide, you can see he likes Apple. Step two, you examine the consumer's like or dislike of the celebrity. So in this case, we can see, if we look from the celebrity to Drake, that he likes Apple. And then last but not least, you examine the consumer's like or dislike of the promoted brand or attitude object. So you can see in this example, the fan likes Apple. So everything is balanced. I like Drake, Drake likes Apple, I like Apple. Okay, so let's have a different scenario, or let's review a different scenario. Let's say Drake likes Apple, right? We start with step one. Drake likes Apple. But step two, the consumer dislikes Apple. What will this consumer do? Well, because the consumer wants to be cognitively consistent, he, in this case, is a guy, may want, to start liking the product or brand that Drake likes. So he might start liking Apple, right? So if he starts liking Apple, what happens? He becomes cognitively consistent. Drake likes Apple, He likes Drake. He likes Apple, right? You get three pluses. All three of these are cognitively consistent. There's another option though. So if you remember from math when you were in elementary school, two negatives create a positive. You could also just stop liking Drake. So think about this. Drake likes Apple. Okay? Drake likes Apple. And at first you liked Drake, but you didn't like Apple. But one thing you could start doing is just disliking Drake. You could say, I don't like Apple. Drake promotes Apple. I don't like Drake. And in this case, you will be cognitively consistent. You don't like Drake. You don't like Apple. He likes Apple, right? So you're doing something that he doesn't like, or he likes, excuse me. You're doing the opposite of that because you don't like him anymore. In this case, again, you're cognitively consistent. Two negatives, not liking the celebrity and not liking the brand they endorse, creates a positive, meaning you're cognitively consistent. There are several different scenarios within balance theory. You can see several different boxes or triangles there. I'm not going to test you over um, a really kind of more in-depth understanding of balance theory. I don't like balance theory, so it's not something I'm going to go super in depth in. But if you think about it intuitively in the first couple of slides, the way I explained it, hopefully it makes sense. It just becomes a little bit murky when you start changing the x's and or the positives and the minuses. Specifically, we're going to talk about the structural models of attitudes. So these models have been created to understand the link between attitude and behavior, and they were created by psychologists. But remember, in this class, we're studying consumer behavior, so we're studying consumer psychology. So we're looking at these psychological theories in terms of how they affect consumption and consumption of a wide variety of things. I just said ride as opposed to wide. Who does that? I don't know. I guess me. Okay, so the first model we're going to discuss is called the tri-component model. It basically says that an attitude maintains or is composed of three components: affect, cognition, and behavior. According to the tri-component model, consumers try to make sure that affect, cognition, and behavior are consistent. And so we'll talk about that in a second. But that means that a change in one attitude component tends to produce related changes in another. So again, I'll talk about that one quick second. So the cognitive component basically just describes a consumer's beliefs about an object. So it looks at knowledge and perception that consumers have about products based on their kind of direct experience as well as indirect experience. And so I use the BMW. I like Beamers. I think they're very nice cars. I think that they are luxury cars. That is a belief of mine. And so, because I hold some fairly positive views about Beamers, according to the tri-component model, I would also have positive affect and positive behavior toward the BMW. So, the affect component of the tri-component model just deals with your emotions or feelings about a particular brand or product. So, for example, I said I liked BMWs. According to the tri-component model, that means I maintain positive feelings about BMW. I maintain positive emotional reactions to Beamers. One thing that's interesting to note is that marketers are really turning their attention to affect or feelings. We've researched and found that consumers purchasing often has or is often impacted by their feelings, what they feel about products or services or other consumption objects. So the last component is behavior. So behavior is defined as the likelihood or tendency that an individual will undertake a specific action or behave in a particular way in regard to the attitude object. So the tendency to buy a certain brand or buy from a certain specific store. So according to, the tri-component model, because I like Beamers, so I have positive affect towards Beamers. Because I believe that Beamers are luxury cars and that they provide a level of luxury. My cognitive evaluation of Beamers is quite high. And so, according to this model, that means that I would have a likelihood or a tendency to buy a Beamer. You probably have already figured this out, though. Um, yes, you might like something and have positive feelings about it. Yes, you might have positive beliefs, but there may be things that get in the way of behavior itself. So, things like the cost of the car versus your income and those kind of things. One thing that I'll say is that this follows a model assuming you don't have those constraints. So, like, you don't have the constraint of money. We know this isn't always the case. And if it's not the case, this very well would probably work. If I were rich, very rich, and I said something like, I have strong feelings that this is a luxury car, I have strong affect, positive affect toward it, I might probably be likely to buy the car. But again, there are things that stand in the way of that, and I'll talk about that next class. So there are some implications for marketing strategy when we think about the tri-component model. If we use this model, this traditional model of understanding how consumers behave, or better yet, understanding how certain components of an attitude, their affect, and their cognition affect behavior, um, marketers may do the following. So they may try to grab consumers' attention by meeting them on their cognitive level with a lot of information. So, their commercial will have information, their websites will contain a lot of information, these kind of things, because the company wants you to understand or like them or have positive evaluations of them on the cognitive level. A brand may try to get you to buy their car by affecting or impacting the affective level, and they may do that by creating emotionally toned messages, right? And then last but not least, they may try to impact or influence the behavioral level by having things like samples, coupons, rebates, these kind of things, maybe cheap lease prices when we think about cars. So one really cool thing about the tri-component of attitudes is that we have the opportunity to survey consumers to understand how they feel about each component of an attitude. And I'm going to show you what that looks like using Diet Coke or the new Diet Cokes. They came out with Twisted Mango, Zesty Blood Orange, all of this stuff. And so we're going to walk through what a survey might look like considering the tri-component model. So I might, as a researcher, decide that I want to ask the specific question when it comes to cognition or brand beliefs, right? So how likely is it that I will get a highly carbonated cola, assuming if I buy brand A? In this case, we're talking about the new Diet Coke. Rate brand A by the following characteristics: not at all carbonated, very carbonated. Indicate how well brand A is described by the following characteristics: highly carbonated, and again, um, it should say over here very carbonated. So again, in this case, we're measuring beliefs about the brand itself. I should have mentioned on the last slide that we're using a Likert scale to look at the data. You could also use a semantic differential scale to measure brand beliefs. So you could have people kind of rate the product on the following characteristics: the taste, so strong taste versus mild, price, caffeination. I'm on a roll here. I'm making up my own words. Caffeine free or high in caffeine, and then distinctive in taste, similar in most taste. So again, we're measuring brand beliefs because we believe this is an important part of attitudes. We could also come back, and say, let's measure the affective component of attitudes for this new Diet Coke. Again, using a Likert scale, rate brand A as follows: I don't like it at all, I like it very much. Rate brand B as follows: very unfavorable versus very favorable. So we could also have consumers, if we're looking at affect, we could have consumers rank a product. So ranking products also gives us an indication of how much a consumer likes a product. And then we could have them rank it on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we could have them list what they like. So you could ask a question like, suppose you could pick 10 free cans of cola and have the choice of any combinations of brands. Which would you pick? How many of each brand, right? And so the answers that they give here would also be an indication of how well or how much they like the new Diet Coke. We could also measure intention to buy. So we could ask consumers to answer this question about the new Diet Coke. I usually drink soft drinks. If that is so, what is the likelihood that you will buy brand A? And then have a scale that goes from kind of definitely will buy to definitely will not buy. If you do something like this, though, you should make sure that you know the last soft drink they consumed. So if the last drink that they consumed was a Coke, a regular Coke, you'd have to think about kind of how they would really evaluate a new Diet Coke. And you'd also have to think about things like cannibalism. Are you cannibalizing your own sales? If they say Pepsi, this is really great knowledge, because if they say they won't buy it or they will buy it, or this means that, or at least this tells you something about how much people are into switching or switching behaviors. I always like to remind students that yes, we can ask people to kind of answer questions on a 1 to 7 scale, but we can also create kind of fun skills for consumers, right? We can use graphic rating scales: I'd never buy versus I'd buy all the time. We could use smiley face descriptors. When you're creating a survey, there are all kinds of formats that you can use for your survey.